Record? Perfect. We are recording. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is a kind of a converted webinar from one of my more popular keynotes that I give around listening is sexy, understanding what your employees really want. And so I'm going to take this and we'll convert it slightly and talk about it under the context of what's happening here today. And I hope everyone is safe and that your employees are safe, your family's safe, and that everyone is surviving in our sort of quarantine, social distancing reality right now. I know as a extrovert, I'm about to go crazy, but I hope you are all doing well, and that this webinar today can be helpful. If you need to reach me on all the social platforms, you can at Chris P. Dyer. You can also go to my website there. And we'll talk more about People G2, where I'm the CEO of that company, and some of the things that we're doing there as well. But we'll go ahead and get started. If you have a question at any time, there is a Q&A section. Please feel free to ask questions as we go, and I'll try to get to those as it makes sense. So, today, as we talk about listening, and this is one of the things that I'm hearing as a huge challenge with everyone going home, that our communication has changed. That listening is certainly people who have a hard time listening, or managers or employees that maybe struggled before are suddenly really struggling. And on the flip side, people are struggling with being heard and making sure that they feel like they're being heard in the organization or by their team or by their managers. And so, kind of give you a little story to kind of represent why this is. I remember it fondly. We had a Super Bowl party at my house, this year. I mean, it was last year, excuse me. And, back when we could all hang out together. And I had a friend who was talking about going camping in Yosemite. And he seemed nervous about it. He seemed to have some anxiety. And immediately everyone in that conversation began talking about camping and Yosemite and sleeping bags and all the things that had to do with camping. And my friend kept going and he didn't seem satisfied. And I had to start asking him questions until we finally revealed he wasn't really worried about camping. He wasn't concerned about which sleeping bag to take or what food to do or how to, prevent bears coming in. He was concerned about being with his family for 10 days camping with no electronics, the internet doesn't work there, and what was going to happen. And so it was very easy immediately for us to go, oh, camping, I know camping, and to start talking about that. But his concern, what he wanted to talk about, was really buried pretty deep into that conversation that we were having. And so if I hadn't asked some of those questions, he may not have ever really articulated what it was he was trying to have a conversation about, where he really wanted to take the conversation. And this is so imperative today. People are struggling with so much right now, whether it's what's happening at work or how they get their jobs done or reaching clients or what's going to happen to them in the future, that as leaders, it's going to take more than a simple question to get us a little bit deeper. And I'm going to hopefully give you some suggestions today on things that you can do, techniques you can use, whether it's during COVID, during a pandemic, or just regular life. We'll go forward. So I wrote a book, The Power of Company Culture. If you're not aware, you can pick that up on Amazon or wherever you buy books. But I focus in on the book on these 7 pillars from my research and hundreds of interviews with top leaders and top companies. And it seems like the best cultures consistently are really good at these 7 things. And listening is one of the ones that we're going to really focus on today. But a part of that is transparency, positivity, measurement, uniqueness, recognition, and how they deal with mistakes. We're going to really deep dive into listening today, even though we'll probably touch a little bit on each of those at some point. So I've had the privilege of speaking all over the place about culture, about the book, and so a lot of the lessons and things that I've been sharing around the world, I'm going to be bringing to you today. But if I don't hit your question, please make sure you ask it. Now, pop quiz, and I'm not going to ask you to put something on the screen. Just think about this answer for yourself. If someone is talking, so let's just say the person in yellow here is talking, Who is responsible for understanding the meaning of what is being said? Who's responsible for the meaning of what is being said? Is it the person saying it, or is it the person hearing it? And this is sort of a complicated question, but the answer is it's the guy in the red. Meaning is determined, and the responsibility of understanding meaning is the person who is hearing it. And I, for a long time, thought, no, meaning is determined by the person who's saying it, because they know if they're mad, if they're sad, if they're happy. But what we found out is that people are really bad at understanding what the real meaning is. And so if we just assume that the person saying it is saying it correctly, if they're demonstrating what they want to say correctly, and I must be interpreting it correctly. And the problem is that we're not. So it is, if we are hearing someone talk, it is our responsibility to ensure that we understand the meaning of what is being said. And then we have to ask questions. We have to poke at that. We have to be concerned that we may not be understanding the meaning of what is being said. And this is never been more imperative when we are now, for many of you, separated in a way that you've never been separated for work. You know, my company's been fortunate that we have been 100% remote since 2009, so we've gotten good at this. We have a lot of practice in this, but many of you are suddenly thrust into this, and meaning you're not able to see the person as much. Maybe you're reading emails, you don't understand tone, and so we really have to take this on as our responsibility. If we are hearing it, reading it, seeing it, that we have to understand what that meaning is. So how do we then think about being better listeners? Well, this is really important for us to do right now, as I said. And the first thing is just a mindset, right? Is to know that you can always be a great listener. I've heard people say to me, well, I'm just not good at being a good listener, or I don't always understand people. It takes practice. But if you have the mindset that, yes, you can be a better listener, that you can be good at this, that is really the biggest starting point. Now, we want to trust what people are telling us, but we want to validate. And again, it gets back to understanding meaning. So what we don't want to do is to start filtering with our own prejudices and our own assumptions about what people are saying, and we want to ask and trust what they're saying, but validate. And then, of course, you've probably heard this 1,000 times, but use the 2-to-1 rule, which is, at the very minimum, you should be listening twice as much as you are talking. If you're not at least able to hit the two for one, you are talking way too much. You're probably bulldozing all of your meetings at work. And you're probably that person who thinks it's a good idea to have an hour-long Zoom with 500 people on the call. No one likes that, by the way. Okay, so the next thing we can do is really make sure we're thinking about cognitive biases. Now, I had the privilege of going to this overnight event with my kids when they were younger at the San Diego Safari Park. Now, this is a sort of the best version of a zoo, which is most of the animals are walking around free. They have a very large area to go, and it's sort of like this man-made Serengeti. And so the prey animals are really just all over the place, and the predator animals are a little bit more secluded, and obviously so they can't attack or hurt anybody. But it has this feeling like it's, you know, you're out there in the wild. And we got to stay overnight, which was really cool. And they brought out lots of animals for the kids and the parents to look at. And one of them they brought out was called a jerboa. And this jerboa is funny looking. I mean, I've never even seen anything like this, right? It's got these big floppy ears like a bunny, and it's got big hind legs like a kangaroo. And the scientists asked everyone, what do you think this is? And of course, everyone said it's either a bunny, it's a kangaroo, it's a marsupial, it's a combination of the two. And the problem is, it's neither. In fact, this is one of the largest cognitive biases that we deal with, that people, when they're going to make a conclusion, only think about, can only access the things that they already know, or the things that are come to their mind quickly. And so we have to remember, we have to go deeper than that. Right? So if someone says something we don't understand, we immediately try to explain it with something we do know, or something that we learned recently about them or the topic. And that's usually a pretty good recipe for failure. So with the jerboa, we want to make sure in this example that we remember that we don't know what we don't know. And if you keep that in front of you, if you keep that concept constantly in your mind that I don't know what I don't know, you can be far better about asking and being inquisitive and being curious about what it is that's missing in this statement or missing in this conversation or missing in this meeting that maybe we're struggling with. We want to make sure that we're not utilizing confirmation bias, which is confirmation bias is why Facebook exists, why most social media platforms exist, because people love to go and talk to people that talk about what they like, right? That tell us that we're right about the world, that our view of the world is correct because they think it as well. Okay, so when we have confirmation bias, we often are looking for the information that validates how we feel, validates what we think, versus searching out for what is the actual truth, even if it doesn't necessarily line up with our worldview or how we've interpreted the situation. And then the other thing we can do is make sure that we are leading with bad news. This is one of my favorite cognitive biases, but people actually leave meetings, they leave situations better when we finish on a good note. So there's a really fascinating study with Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, two of my favorite cognitive bias gurus. There's some great books about them. But they did an experiment where they put people's hands in ice water for like 5 minutes and they asked them to rate how painful that was. And then they did it for 8 minutes with another group, but the last minute they injected warm water. So those people actually had their hands in cold water longer. They rated the experience not as bad as the people who only had the 5 minutes of ice. So what we get out of this is that if we start with bad and hit the hard stuff, right? We talk about the most difficult things first, and then we finish with the good stuff. People leave the conversations happier. They leave it with a better impression because our brain likes to sort of remember the good stuff. And if we put at the end, it's great. Now, some of you might be thinking, Chris, I'm really smart. I do good news, bad news, good news. And that's called the crab sandwich. And that does not work because people inherently will stop believing the good stuff that you start with, knowing that you're bringing in the bad news. So we always want to start with the bad news, the hard stuff, the most difficult conversations first, and end with the good stuff later. The other part that when we look at cognitive biases is we want to make sure that we are physically ready to have a good conversation. And there are many reasons why we get blocked from this. Now, one of them is, are we hungry? There was a study, again, this is Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman, where they surveyed and they studied probation judges in Israel. And they found out that judges, their typical answer is no. If they have no information, if they just had to decide why someone would get probation or not, or parole, they would say no. And in the morning, they were more likely to say yes, and the closer they got to lunch, the more likely they were to say no. And the same thing happened in the afternoon. So the hungry, what they found out was that there was no rhyme or reason as to why the judges were giving these verdicts, other than the number one factor was how hungry they were. So think about when we bring people in for meetings at 11:30, right before lunch, they're starving, and then we're asking them to be good participants and to think critically about things and to really share. And the problem is that they're closed off and they are hungry. So you're far better off having a meeting after lunch, or to bring a snack to your lunch if you have to, or to your meeting, excuse me. We need to find ways for people to make sure that they're not in that state of being hungry. And the same is true for being hot or being cold. Now, what's cool is right now with everyone being home, they can totally control their environment. Typically at work, we find that there are some people that are too hot or too cold. And when they are too hot or too cold, they also tend to be in that same state of not being open and receptive to having good conversations with you. And then, so the other ones that are super important to think about from the cognitive bias is there's three here that I really want you to think about. And I have some videos on my website that explain these if you're interested. But the first one is a fundamental attribution error. This is where if someone was late to a meeting, we're likely to blame them being late on an internal reason, like something about them. They're late, they're rude, they're not a nice person, they weren't raised properly. We blame them. But if we're late for a meeting, we tend to say, I was stuck in traffic, my kids were crazy this morning, my spouse lost my keys. We have an external reason, excuse. There was a reason why I was late. There's a reason why I had this bad behavior. And yet when someone else does it, we blame them personally. So remember that. Next time you have a bad interaction with someone, think about what the external reasons could have been, and have a conversation with them about that. The second one is the halo effect. So we also want to make sure we're not fooled by people who look nice, who dress nice, who make nice looking presentations, and that we sort of have this halo idea that if people look nice and they have things that look nice, that they must be doing a good job and they're productive. This is one of the best things about remote work, I think, is that when we have to figure out how people get their jobs done and what makes a good job, how do we measure that? We've eliminated whether or not they dress nice and look spiffy, or that they are an attractive person or not. It's did they get the job done, and that's it. And then the third one is the availability heuristic. So that was sort of what I talked to you about before with the Gervais example, that we don't rely on recent information only or things that we already know, that we stop and consider things that maybe we don't know. Maybe there isn't more information out there I don't know, and you go and ask that question to other people. What else? What am I not seeing? What information do I not have? This is what I think might be happening, and then you ask someone else, what else could it be? So as we try to think about being good listeners, there's a lot of great ways we can do that, and this is really difficult right now because I often talk about people removing distractions, and I also tell people how awesome remote work is, and yet most of you have gone home not only by yourself, but you've gone home with your spouse and your kids or your in-laws or grandparents. You now suddenly are working in an environment that's far more distracting than maybe what you were in before. Now, remote work is not normally like that because not everyone's usually home, but we really have to think about how can we remove distractions so that we can be really in tune and really able to listen to others and make sure they feel heard. So we want to reduce noise, shutting doors, reducing distractions. If you're on Zoom calls or WebEx calls or Microsoft Teams calls, whatever, mute yourself until it's time to talk. On Zoom, all you have to do is hold the space bar down when you're ready to talk, and it will unmute and let it go. But that way, all that background noise that's happening maybe at your place, or maybe your dog, or someone keyboarding or whatever, you can reduce that. It makes a huge difference. Now, if you're having a one-on-one discussion, you probably shouldn't have your phone just sitting there on your desk because, and you're looking at it, or you're at your watch, you're in the middle of a conversation with someone and then all of a sudden you're talking. We want to remove devices as much as possible and be able to have those conversations with people in a very well-connected way. And then we want to ask for someone's attention. Now, hey, I really need to talk to you about this. Can I have your undivided attention for the next 15 minutes? When you ask someone that, you're sort of creating a contract, and you get a far better result than if you just sit down and talk to someone and suddenly they're distracted and now you're upset and then there's this confrontation. And then we want to make sure we're modeling the behavior. So if we expect somebody else to be listening, we need to be listening. We need to put our devices away and make sure that we're doing all those things we're asking of them. Now, body language is a big one in making sure people feel heard and that we're listening. And this is going to be a little bit different because obviously we're doing a lot of video stuff and we're only kind of seeing a little bit of people's information. But it's a good reminder that we definitely want to be on video with people as much as possible during this time so we can see their faces and we can pick up on as much body language as possible. Remember, I would say proper greeting. That's obviously changed for right now, but what is a proper greeting for a remote? What does that mean? Is it saying hello? Is it saying hello to each person as they come in? Figure out what works for you, for your company. Remember, we have good, that visual face-to-face. That means good, proper placement of your. I still have people coming on the calls where I can only see half their face. We need to make sure that you have that figured out. Good eye contact. It's really good. So this is a difficult one a lot of times for remote. The camera's here for me. A lot of people are looking down at their thing, and so their eyes are down, and now when you're talking to someone, they don't feel like you're looking at them in the eyes. So make sure when you're talking, you're looking at your camera lens so the other person feels like you are really hearing them and that you're listening. And then make sure, this is again a little bit, if you're sitting like this, doing one of these jobs, when you're on your call, you're showing someone that you're closed, you're not listening. So we want to have palms up, open arms, not have our legs crossed. Those are all things that not only show the other person we're open, but actually tricks our own minds. If our legs are closed right now, if our arms are closed right now, we're actually telling ourselves that we're not sure about this. We're actually closing ourselves off. So we want to be open. Remember, trust, then validate. So then we want to try to be active listeners. And remember that we don't want to finish the other person's. In fact, this is the one I struggled with the most, if I'm being honest. People started talking. They had something to say. Maybe I use that camping example. I started talking about camping, and I know about camping. And I would have all these things to say that I need to let the person finish. I need to really be open and listen to them, and not listen to respond, but listen to understand. And you do that by noticing the little things. How are they sitting? What are they saying? How are they saying it? What's their body language like? What's their eye contact like? Make sure you do your part not to judge what they're saying. You may need to judge at some point and down the road, but as they're saying it, you're listening to understand first. And remember, it's okay to pause. It's okay to think. It's okay to tell them, I need a moment to think about what you just told me. You don't have to have all the answers. I think this is really a big struggle for leaders, or even someone who's been put in a leadership position pretty early on, is they feel like they have to have an answer right away. They have to have the perfect answer. And so they just start saying things that then they can't keep up with. It's okay to pause. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I need to think about it and get back to you. Now, understanding versus responding, as I said, is a big one. And so we want to make sure that we, take notes, that we nod our heads, that we ask questions, that we show that person we're interested. But again, that we make sure that remember, it's our responsibility to understand what's being said, to understand what is that message, what is that tone. It is our job as the listeners to make sure we understand. And we can only do that by connecting in that way. Now, make sure that we, practice not responding until later. This is sometimes hard for people, but I promise, as you work on this, as you get better at it, if what you thought of initially was important for you to say later on, you won't forget it. I thought I would forget it, and I didn't, if it was important. And sometimes that thought goes away, and I continue to listen, and actually a much better thought and a much deeper response sort of comes to mind, and then that really helps you connect with that person better. And then repeat back what you heard. So, again, this is our responsibility. Say, I'm hearing you saying this, and often people say, well, that's not exactly what I was saying. And on that, I have found that this concept of 3+ is the best way for us to do this. So what we want to do is repeat back that key information to somebody. Okay, 3 times. So what I'm hearing you say is that you're worried that your coworker is bulldozing your meetings. Well, I'm not exactly saying that. I'm saying that I feel like they won't let me talk. Okay, so you're not worried about them talking. You're just saying they won't let you talk. Well, yes, but it's only and so you have to keep asking questions. Keep repeating back what you're hearing until the person says, yes, that's it. Because often people don't even realize they're not articulating it as clearly as they think they are. So continue to get that validation, continue to make sure you said it 3 times and they've agreed with you on 3 different occasions to really be sure you understand what the other person is saying. Okay? Ask all the questions you need to clarify. That's super important. And then if you need to, ask the other person to summarize it back to you. So maybe if someone's upset, maybe if someone hasn't quite been able to express themselves very well, maybe when they've calmed down a little bit and you've had a good conversation, ask them to summarize at the end. What do they really want you to understand? What were they really trying to make sure that you heard? And you will be surprised at how different that answer is often than what that entire conversation was or what you even thought it was about. This trick, and I shouldn't call it a trick because I think it's actually a really good technique, really helps you bond and connect with your coworkers, with the people your direct reports, with your managers, whoever it may be, to really get them to summarize that back to you. All right, now the other thing we want to do is try to avoid group thought. Group thought is a killer in good communication. It is a killer in good listening. And it is really easy right now where everyone is afraid and there's a lot of anxiety that it's just easy to go along with the group and not to argue. So what we ask inside of this to avoid group thought is for everyone to come to their own conclusions before considering those of others. That sounds weird. Don't we usually want open-mindedness? Well, actually, we want people to look at things, make up their own minds, right? Come to their own conclusions, evaluate it as best they can, and then go back and willing to be open-minded about other ways to do it. But if we just walk in completely open-minded and we haven't really thought it all the way through, it's difficult for us to be really valuable in that conversation. Then if we don't feel comfortable, we need to ask for permission to disagree. So if you're someone who doesn't feel strong enough in a this particular group setting to share what you think or to give your opinion, just ask for that permission. You will find that people say, of course, we want you to tell us your opinion. You can get that connectedness that, yes, they want to hear what you think. And if that doesn't work, then you can just use this other technique, which is to ask, well, what if we did this? Or what else would we do? Okay, good. You all seem to be totally set on this one idea, but just in case, what else would we do? And that's a really cool way to get them to think about other ways to do things, even if you feel like you're not in a position or not strong enough or don't have the enough authority to disagree with someone in the room. Now, I talked about positivity earlier. This is sort of a simple one, but a great way to increase effectiveness in communication, to increase your listening, to really make sure that people that you are working with every day feel great about working with you is to say yes. So what if for the rest of the day you said yes to every question that was asked of you? Everyone. What if you did it all week? What would that look like? How powerful might that be? Now, I know what some of you are saying. I have teenagers, I have employees, I have all these people in my life that would take advantage. Now, I'll give you my little technique. It's yes and or yes but. So you can add parameters around your yes. But if you say yes consistently, you will find that your interactions with everyone in your life is far better. So let's just say it's a teenager. Hey, can I go to this party? Yes, but there have to be adults there. You're saying yes, right? Can I go out with my friends? Yes, but your homework needs to be done, right? Can I have a raise? Yes, but we need to come up with these parameters. You need to, yes, and you need to have completed these things in order to be considered for that raise, whatever it is. So you can find a way to say yes. Because when you consistently say no, people don't come to you with their ideas. People don't bring you good or bad information because they expect you to be negative. They expect you to be difficult. So, we really want to make sure that we open that up with saying yes as much as we can. Okay. Now, maybe some of you don't feel like you can do that all the time. I understand that. But, make sure that we are really thinking about yes all the time as your simple answer. It takes practice. So maybe try it for the rest of the day. I promise you'll find some good ones there. Now, to make sure to listen to be heard, sort of step 2, I want to talk a little bit about how we meet. Now, this is my team, some of my people on my team here. And, we want to make sure that we are listening and that we're being heard. And a lot of that comes into how we meet. I do see some awesome questions coming in. I promise I'm going to get to those. So if you have questions, keep throwing them in there. We'll get to those at the end, I promise. But let's talk a little bit about what makes a good team. Now, you may have noticed on my slide there was only 6 of us. I told you earlier, I can't tell you how many people have been complaining to me about these hour-long, huge hour-long, 25, 30, 50, 100 people inside of a Zoom call. That is not how we're going to be effective communicators during this crisis, or even ever. If you're on a call with more than 7 people, it's a webinar. It is not a meeting. So let's talk about what makes a great team, a great meeting scenario where we can be highly effective, communicate at a high level, and really work well together. First of all, that group, that team has to be self-forming. If you force 5, 6, 7 people to be together, that's not an effective way to do it. They need to want to be together. They need to want to work together. And so we want to say, hey, go do this thing, and these people come together in a very self-forming way. 2, 5 to 7 people max. Jeff Bezos says if you can't feed your team with 2 large pizzas, there's too many people there. I totally agree. 5 to 7 is the magic number. I think 5 is perfect. 6 is tolerable. 7's okay. If you go to 8, you go to 4, it just doesn't work. So try to keep your meetings in these group settings. Now, I also been telling people stop having one-on-one meetings, especially right now as we're all working from home. Okay, try to get into small groups, have great meetings, and then go out and let that information facilitate out of that. And then establish unique norms. So every group that's going to be meeting on a consistent basis, and there are finite groups and there are infinite groups. So an infinite type group is like customer service or sales, right? They continue to meet over and over and over. They have they're no beginning and no end. And there are other types of groups that get together for a project, and they're finite. But whatever the group is, they need to decide what does success look like? If we do a great job and people are going to pat us on the back, what did we do? What does that look like? And you needed to decide that so you make sure that you know what to do in your organization. Number 2, if we fail, if we do a bad job, if things don't work out, if everything crumbles around us, what does failure look like? Talk about that in advance before you start, please, because it will make a huge difference. Huge, huge difference for you. And then number 3, and I think this is the most important, what will you do in conflict? If your group disagrees, if you have a hard time, how will you deal with your conflict? Is it democracy? Just everyone takes a vote? Is it the manager makes the final decision? Do you bring in an outside manager? Is it the CEO? How do you deal with if your group is stuck in infighting and you can't move forward? How will you deal with that? You have to have that agreement before you get to that point, or else your strategy just won't work. All right, so one thing that I've done a long time at People G2, I've learned from some great leaders, but this is so effective right now. If you take anything, from this webinar, especially during this time with COVID, it's this right now. So if you weren't paying attention, now it's time to pay attention. It's bonding. So any meeting that we do 30 minutes or more, we make sure that we slow down and do some level of bonding. And that is, ask everyone, how are you showing up? You will get answers that run the gamut from how they're feeling emotionally, how they're doing physically, how they're feeling about the meeting, how they're feeling about work, whatever it may be. You as the leader or you as that member of that group can get a really good understanding of where everybody is right now. And you may find there's some people in that group or in that team that are not ready to have that meeting, that are not in a good place right now. And you can either not have the meeting, or you can make sure that you're not asking that person to suddenly, deliver all this information or to participate in a way when clearly they're really struggling today. And so we see much, these sort of peaks in anxiety and people feeling emotional right now. And so checking in can really be huge for people. Secondly, when you're done with the meeting, ask how everyone is leaving. So maybe they say, well, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling more anxious, I'm more confused than ever, oh, this meeting gave me great clarity. You can get a really good gauge of where everybody's at. Now, the one thing that I will definitely say you want to make sure you do is if you are the leader, if you're the more senior person in the group, the more senior people should go last. Remember we talked about group thought earlier. We don't want to show up as the leader. I'm the CEO of my company. I show up and I say, hey, everyone, I'm feeling super excited. I'm so crazy, over the moon about this idea. Everyone's going to feel pressure to be in a good mood and to be in line with me. But instead, if I start with them and see where they're at, and then I tell them however I feel, they're going to feel more open to sharing and being open and honest with me. All right, so some of the things that we do, this comes from Marshall Goldsmith. It's called Feed Forward. Remember that if you need someone to change behaviors, ask them if they can do something in the future. So, hey, the next time we have a meeting, can you do this? Which is far better than, hey, in that last meeting, why were you such a jerk, right? Immediately defensive. Hey, in the last meeting, you were talking over everybody. No one could get a word in. Again, someone's going to be defensive because they can't change their past behavior. But if you say, hey, in the next meeting, could you make sure that you allow everyone an opportunity to talk? Can you make sure that you let people finish their thoughts before you bring up your own? Hey, in the next meeting, can you make sure you're listening twice as much as you're talking? People usually say, sure, I can try that. I can do that. Because it's about future behavior, which they can control. They can change. And then sort of the last little bit here, we talk about some of the meeting types that we have right now. I think how we meet matters so much, but never more important than right now during this pandemic. So we have cockroach meetings. They're 15 minutes, single topic, always start on time, never go past 15 minutes. In fact, our goal is always to end early. And this is one topic, and it's optional for those people that you invite. So if I'm invited to a cockroach meeting, I know I can show up if I want. I know what the one topic is, and we show up, we quickly help someone on the phone, and we get off, and we're done. We are not stuck on a Zoom call for an hour. We are on for usually 8 or 9 minutes. We hear what the problem is, we help someone solve it, and we get off the phone. We don't talk about our kids, we don't talk about our day, we're not doing the bonding, we're not checking in. It's just, hey, show up and help somebody. Now, we also can have larger meetings. We call these tiger team meetings. So with the cockroach, if there's a cockroach in your bathroom, it's a small problem. If there's a tiger in your bathroom, it's a big problem, right? So think of all the things that will go into getting a tiger out of your bathroom. We would need, dart gun and animal control and a crane or whatever, right? So tiger team meetings are big meetings. There's a full agenda. No agenda, no meeting, right? They're going to be at least an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe all day. They are big, big meetings. And so people know there's a difference, right? We're not all going to be on the phone. It's not going to be, as collaborative. It's going to be more controlled and really going through an agenda. And we're going to have different parts of the meeting. We're going to have breaks. It's going to be much more curated. Ostrich meetings are like cockroach meetings, 15 minutes, all the same rules, except we're just here to get information. We're just here to help someone with information, to maybe tell them what a client meeting happened, or what happened when they were gone yesterday if they were out, or what happened when they were gone the last 2 weeks on vacation. We're just getting them information in a very short, tight period. Again, this is pretty simple. It's on a single topic. And then tsunami planning meetings. So I find that this one really helps people practice being creative, practice arguing, practice feeling safe in a group to collaborate and to think. And so here we give people fake ideas. What would happen if? What would happen if there was a giant pandemic we had to deal with? What would happen if we landed this giant client? What would happen if half of our business disappeared? These are things that we have talked about internally and practiced talking about, and even implemented certain great ideas that came out of this. So these are practice scenarios, and we usually do 15-minute meetings. And these are great ways, again, for people to have that psychological safety, to see my team is going to be open and accepting, and we're going to collaborate, and we're going to talk, and no one's going to laugh at me or call me stupid. All right. I'm going to pause here for questions. I do have a few more things to answer. I see lots of great questions, so I feel like we need to do that. So it looks like Craig would argues he would challenge who's in charge of meeting. As a leader, you have to ask questions to ensure. So actually, there's quite a bit of research that comes out of this that meaning is actually determined by who is hearing it. Obviously, if someone's screaming at you, it's pretty safe that they're mad, but meaning is determined by the person who's hearing it. So David says, I wonder what your thoughts, experience are about pacing or mirroring, so copying the nonverbal language of the sender. Yeah, I think mirroring is great. It's a great way to connect with people. So if you're seeing that someone is, doing certain behaviors or speaking a certain way, it is a great technique that some people do feel comfortable with, that you can sort of repeat back some of the things they're saying. If you can mirror some of the ways in which they're acting, that can have a good connection with them if you feel like you really need to get through with them. Also, David asked about self-forming teams. So how to ensure that bigger teams, that everyone is implicated, at least the team. So certainly we want to make sure that in Scrum is a thing called the Scrum of Scrum. So we do want to kind of make sure our teams are healthy, and we do have each leader of each team come together and for a meeting, and we make sure our teams are healthy. So we may ask people to consider being on teams if they haven't. We may ask people we may share with our organization, hey, we really have a need over here. Who might be able to volunteer? But the best we can, the more we can get people to volunteer to be self-forming, and we have people working with people who want to work with each other, the better off we are. And to worry less about the dynamics of introverts and extroverts, and worry less about it's shocking sometimes when we've hired them to be a bookkeeper and come to find out in their previous life they know all this stuff about marketing, and then they volunteer for the marketing team. There's great help. Lots of great comments. Thank you so much for those of you that are giving the nice comments. I won't read those aloud. So is all this information in the book? A lot of the information is in my book, yes. Some of it's here. So how do you address gossip in a small government agency? Well, that's a tough one. I would say that if you're finding this is trouble, maybe you might want to bring people together and say, hey, what has everyone been hearing? How are you showing up? Or what have you been hearing? What would you like to talk about? And maybe just sort of, again, hit that up front. Hit it, the difficult stuff in the beginning, and just hit it head on. You might say, I've heard people are saying this, this, and this. I want to make sure we address this. I want to make sure that we set the record straight. I might not want to go after certain things that are considered gossip that maybe aren't worth giving power or even any attention to. But I think if they're serious things that you want to make sure are addressed, just address them, bring them up. So looks like someone else brought up, Brady brought up, as a leader, if you're trying to convey info, isn't it our responsibility to make sure the message has been understood? So it is, I think it is a great technique to make sure that if you are talking, that you are making sure that people understood. And you can say that by repeating things, 3 different ways that you can do that. You can ask people to summarize back to you what they heard, absolutely. But the more responsibility that the people who are listening take on to make sure they understand, the better sort of 360 version we have of this. So as leaders, it's our responsibility to make sure we are delivering that information and communicating in many different ways and over-communicating and repeating that communication so that people have different opportunities to hear that. But we do need to make sure that we reinforce with people. It is their responsibility to make sure they understand, and it's their responsibility to make sure they understand meaning. So they need to clarify that constantly. So this is kind of 360 process that we find is really, really helpful. All right, so I don't see any more questions, but again, lots more comments, which I really, really appreciate it. And so I'll go through here with the last couple things, and we'll finish off and let you all back to your day. Make sure, no matter what, of all the stuff we're talking about, I always want to make sure that we talk about these 3 things. This is Daniel Pink's work. In anything you do in your work, you have to make sure that people have the autonomy to do their jobs, that they have mastery, they have some learning new things somewhere in their life, and that they understand what your purpose is for your company. There's no better time than right now to get good at this, because people have a lot of autonomy working from home, and you should be trusting them. You should be working with them on how they can do that the best they can. If you're doing things like asking someone to write down a list of what they did today to prove to you that they worked, that is not autonomy, that is micromanagement. And I've heard companies doing this, okay? There is no better time right now. People don't have as much work to do, and to ask them to go read a book and come back and talk to them about it. Ask them to go learn something new that maybe would help them in their job or help your company later on as we come out of this pandemic. This is the perfect time for mastery. And if you don't feel like your employees really understand your purpose, it's a great time to have town halls and small meetings and to be really honing in on this, maybe thinking about what your purpose is, if it needs to be changed right now, and making sure your employees really understand what that is. So, and then one way to make sure that you really are staying on top of this, and we love to do this all the time, but even if it's just for right now during COVID, ask 1 question a week to all your employees. Now you can decide, is this going to be anonymous, only you're going to see it as a leader, or just you as a team leader? Are you going to share these answers with everyone in the company or everyone in the team? That's up to you, and I like to change it up by communicate up front what it's going to be before I ask someone a question. But ask them, how are you doing? What's your biggest struggle? What's the best success you had this week? Asking your employees, asking your team members 1 question a week, you'll get almost 100% response rate. You'll get incredibly well thought out answers because they're only having to respond to 1 question. Don't send somebody 50 questions and expect them to give you great answers. Go back and think about what's the 1 thing you wish you knew this week from your staff, and go ask them. And then you can take that information, and if you need to make adjustments, you need to address gossip, you need to have a webinar, you need to make sure that you get them the resources they need, whatever it is, you can do that 1 question at a time. Okay, and then last but not least, I just wanted to kind of remind you all, thank People G2, my company, for putting this on. We went remote, we've been doing all these things, and it has led to us being a best place to work year after year after year after year. It's allowed us to be a fastest growing company 4 times on Inc.'s fastest growing list of privately held companies, and you can find us all over the web and all these different places. And I really attribute that to us being remote, to us working this way. And so it's sort of my challenge to you that if you can go back, the more you can do of this, the better your company is going to be, the higher your performance will be, the better your profits will be, the better performance you will have, the more productivity you will have in your organization over and over and over again. So that's it for the webinar. Thank you so much. There's my contact information. There's the book. If you need help with anything to do with that, great. If you need help with your background checks, your drug testing, peopleg2.com as well. Really was a pleasure working with you or talking to you all through this today, and I hope it was helpful. If you have questions, please let me know. Thank you, everyone.